What's up everybody, Tom Fazio here. Welcome to the channel. I'm going to be doing a Law of the Die today from Law of the Die, the book. I love these laws. I mean, I would say that, this is a fictional narrative, or a two-in-one, if you will. There are two protagonists in the book. But the laws that permeate the book, that are interspersed throughout some of the chapters, for me are not fiction, right? I think that these are critical reframes on the way that we approach uncertainty and stack options in our favor. And I think it's a fascinating way to look at lifestyle and or momentum design, right? How do we actually set ourselves up so that we have a tailwind in life or in business or in personal pursuits instead of a headwind? So that's what these are kind of about, right? And so this one that comes in the chapter, A Real Naked Jerk, I'll read it out for you. Law of the Die. Commitment to action without expectation of outcome is the dice man's greatest edge. A close second is a discerning intuition adept at filtering those options that should be cut short in favor of other untested avenues. Maturing filters are necessary in order to graduate from puerile dabbling to intentional life design. This requires time and tutelage, for which there is no better teacher than the die. Right, so this one, as many of them are, it's kind of jam-packed there with a few different thoughts, hopefully super concise so that we can take it away, ruminate on it, maybe even apply it for ourselves. I'm going to break it down for you a little bit. And so while these do stem from certain experiences that one of the protagonists, Grandmaster Flash, has experienced and then tried to consolidate and pass on his own learnings in the form of laws, but a scroll that gets passed down. I think these stand alone, and that's why I'm reading them alone, right? So this idea, I'll break it down. The commitment to action without expectation of outcome is the dice man's greatest edge. So if you guys have seen some of my other videos on dice theory or read my first book, you guys get the basic premise, right? We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what's good for us all the time. And a lot of times exposing ourselves to novel, if not random things, gives us unexpected payoff or upside in life. Pretty simple premise, right? Do more things, get different results. But the older that we get and the more comfortable we get, the less we experiment, trial, and expose ourselves to new things. And so this one is a bit challenging, I think, right? So commitment to action without expectation of outcome is the greatest edge. So the reality is, the more that we start to dabble and tinker with our lives, the riskier it becomes, right? It doesn't just open the door to new upside, it potentially opens the door to other types of fallout, negative responses, depending on how daring or risky somebody goes, injury, heartbreak, a whole number of things could be negative consequences. So the best analogy I could give is this idea that I think it was Ron Bilicki, martial artist of Filipino boxing, had said, don't stop to admire your work. Pretty simple premise, but in martial arts it's critical, right? So what happens is, beginners, sometimes intermediate fighters will engage with somebody, maybe that's even better than them, and they'll say, oh man, if I just get one shot or one or two shots, and what will happen is, they'll score a point or connect well, and then they'll stop for a second kind of like in awe of what they've just accomplished, kind of like, did you guys see that? Did you guys see what just happened? Maybe not that extreme, but they'll be thinking that. They'll be, pausing for a second. And it's this idea that, well, yeah, but the fight's still going. Life is in flux. The more you stop to admire your work, the less aware you are of what's happening now in the present, right? So this is kind of saying that, a message to the risk taker, or a message to, the dice man or the dabbler or the tinkerer, you can play in this domain and you can play in this game of taking those risks and tinkering your way through. But the more expectations you have, the harder it's going to be to continue this path, because things are going to weigh on you. You don't get to see payoff in every test, right? If you're used to that type of cycle where I do this and then this happens, if every action needs a consequent positive return, well, you're not going to keep doing stuff for very long because not a lot of things return positive results. Pretty simple. So it's really this idea about how do we surrender and commit ourselves to acting without worrying about the consequences. And I've had clients that have mentioned that, after being through, a couple of the weightlessness process, the tribes that I run, which is a mind-body process, one of the consequences for them was that they found a higher level of presence in their work, and as such, were not as worried about the outcome. Now, they're at a high level, super driven executive, right? But because they were no longer obsessing about the outcome or the metrics, they were able to completely focus on doing quality work, and it transformed their performance at work, right? So this is kind of like that idea. Don't stop to admire your work. Be where you are. Focus fully. And the more that you tinker and trial, the more important this becomes, I think. The next sentence, a close second to what we just discussed. A close second is a discerning intuition, adept at filtering those options that should be cut short in favor of other untested avenues. Right, so this one is deceptively challenging. It's going to resonate. It'll make sense at first, hearing. It's like, well, yeah, obviously, if stuff's not working, pivot. I mean, we kind of get that, right? But the challenge here is that if you're truly immersing yourself and committing to action, and we can't trust the outcome, well, then it becomes a lot more challenging to say, well, I'm going to cut this path off. It doesn't seem to be performing. I'm going to be putting a little bit more effort and time into that direction, or trialing something new, or rolling the dice for another option. Inherent in this, admittedly, is a slight contradiction, right? We've got to commit ourselves to the path that the dice dictates, or forget dice if you don't want to, focus on that level of randomness, but you set your tinkering list. I'm going to trial these things that cost minimal time, money, commitment. I'm going to see where these paths lead. I'm going to open up myself to new opportunities. And obviously then the challenge becomes, well, how do we get better at that? How do we get to that next level where we say, well, not all options are created equal. I need to start to see where things might pay off a little bit more than others, and dedicate a little bit more time. And all I can say, which is what this section ends with, is that that's not something you're going to know before you dive in. That's the hardest part of a process like this. And again, I highlight this process, how me and a very close friend use this as almost a personal growth, if not business development strategy for years back in Shanghai. And we threw ourselves in and made a lot of stupid mistakes. But after a while, we got incredibly good at filtering the types of options we were rolling for, because you have to. You don't want to keep doing stupid shit, right? Pretty simple. And so this requires time and tutelage, for which there is no better teacher than the die. It's not something even an experienced dice man or master tinkerer can tell you. It's something that you have to discover for yourself based on your direction, your values, your idea of payoff versus risk, right? And these need to be tested and practiced religiously. But what I'm trying to say is you can. All of us can. And if we're willing to throw ourselves into those environments, the game of entrepreneurship where we tinker and trial, or you name your domain where we don't have all the insights up front, but that we need to learn along the way, we get better, right? And if you don't die in the short term, metaphorically or literally, you'll learn those aspects, right? And I say just before the end, maturing filters are necessary in order to graduate from puerile dabbling to intentional life design, right? And so this is that's the crux of the matter. If we're trying to use a strategy of increasing options in life in order to establish eventually momentum toward whatever direction, right? Toward passion, career, hobby, whatever it might be. Well, this is a necessary step. We need to acquire maturing filters, which simply put, those that discern between options that might provide a little bit more payoff versus options that might be a total time waste. There's no clear map for this. This is something that we have to, I think, work at a higher level, a level of principle, and then try consistently to apply the principle and ask ourselves that reflexive question: is this reasonable? Is this reasonable? But not one of, is this reasonable? I'm stepping out of the game. We still have that practice of showing up and applying ourselves, generating options. As I mentioned in one of the other ones, options aligned to purpose. Where do I want to go? I don't have the answers of how to get there. How do I test and trial things on a regular basis that ought to give me a little bit of momentum or tailwind, right? And the more that we do that, if we are just committed to showing up and continuing to trial and test options, maturing filters are a byproduct. We just know, right? Eventually we just know. So, yeah, I like this one. Hopefully you do too. If you got any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Drop them in the comments section. A copy of the book can be found on Amazon, link in the description if that interests you. But independently of the narrative or the read, hopefully it's a little bit of food for thought. And I'll see you in the next video, guys. Be weightless.